This is Steve Long from Long Memories LLC, and we're doing an interview today in conjunction with the Hamilton County Public Library. The taping is being done on June 17th, 2014 in the offices of John Steele in downtown Cincinnati. And so we're going to begin, and John, I ask that you might introduce yourself with your full name, please.
I'm John Frederick Steele.
Excellent. And to start off, just where were you born and how long did you live in that area?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, October 31st, which is Halloween, of 1924. It's my understanding that my father was in the investment business, traveling throughout the state, and they carried me away in a basket to Rochester, New York, where they came from, and I lived there until 1941, when I moved with my family to Cincinnati.
Okay. So you were born in Detroit because your dad was traveling at the time, but then you were back in a basket going back to home in Rochester.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's quite an interesting story in and of itself. And so your dad was in the investment business.
Yes.
Did your mom work outside the home?
No, she was a homemaker.
Mm-hmm. Good, good.
She was a very busy person, but
Yes.
she was not engaged in any professional activity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did your parents or any other family member participate in the military that you recall discussions?
My father was in the Marine Corps. He was an orderly on the battleship USS New York. And she was involved with the British Grand Fleet in World War I.
Oh, okay.
I had two brothers who were in the Marines. One was actually, he was a naval pilot. He flew, and the other brother was a Marine foot soldier.
And were they both older?
Younger.
They're both younger, okay.
One was the Marine, was 2 years younger, and the other, I'm sorry, he was 5 years younger.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was 13 years younger.
Okay. And do you recall your dad talking at all about his service? Did that influence you in any way? Or well, let's start with what do you recall about your dad talking about his experience?
Well, he spoke quite often about his experience as an orderly on this battleship. He said there were admirals, an admiral, and a captain, and he was an orderly to those men on the battleship.
Okay.
So it was a very interesting, I think, exciting life for him.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So most of what you heard from your dad was pretty positive as it related to military service. Yes. Okay, good. And what were you doing before you actually entered the service?
I was a freshman at Dartmouth College.
And can you tell us a little bit about how, we've talked a little bit before, but how you were in the freshman class, you were at Dartmouth, and sort of how you were brought into the service?
This was 1942, the fall of 42, and a man came up from Boston dressed in a naval aviator's uniform with his wings, and he corralled about 80 of us in our freshman class, and he held forth for about an hour and said we would be the number 2 Dartmouth Squadron if we signed up. And he said if we did sign up, we would be allowed to finish our freshman year, and we would enter active duty in the Navy as a cadet as soon as the freshman year was over. And he said, among other things, you'll all be together the rest of the war.
Yep. And so you all enlisted at that
Well,
point, at the
most
end
of
of the year.
most of the men in that group, in that assembly, did enlist.
Okay. Yep. And then from there, you finished that freshman year before you went into military service.
Correct.
So you enlisted and into the Navy. When you departed for training camp, do you recall any specifics of going to training camp and training camp itself?
Well, I was in Cincinnati when I received orders to go to Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. That was the first training base that our group went to.
And what do you remember from that training?
Well, it was the middle of summer, pretty hot, and we were engaged in athletics for a half a day to get into condition, and a half a day's ground school, taking physics and aeronautics, navigation, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hot.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we were there, if I remember correctly, about 3 months.
Okay.
You want me to go off and give just a little extra?
Sure, that'd be great,
All right.
please.
Well, I remember the first Sunday we were there, and we were given orders to go to church, and the Catholic boys were told to get on one side of the quadrangle in the middle of the campus, Protestants on the other side. I don't recall anyone giving orders to the Jewish boys, or if there were any.
Okay.
But we marched off to our respective churches, and we found when we returned that the Catholic boys had returned about 20 minutes before we did as Protestants. So from that day on, every Sunday we were all Catholics.
Oh, that's a great story.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, that's good.
First time I'd ever been in a Catholic church. It was quite interesting.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
That's great. So, what do you remember about the Catholic Church,
Well, there
or about
was
the?
a lot of Latin, and the choir was at the back of the church. Unlike the choir that I was accustomed to, which was up in the nave, the forward part of the church.
Yep. Oh, that's great. What a fabulous story. So, any other? So you mentioned doing the physics and aeronautics, a lot of the things specific to piloting.
Yes.
But it was more classroom at that stage.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
And during the athletics, we had all kinds of athletic endeavors. And we also went out on cross-country jogging. I can remember going out into the country and going by the home of a very, very well-known music composer of the music of that day, and I'm trying to remember who that was, but I'll think of that. I'm sorry, I don't.
Oh, that's all right. But
Yeah.
but you're able to sort of enjoy a little bit of the countryside
Oh, yes.
while you're doing some of this.
Right.
Yes. It wasn't exactly tourist, but at least you
Exactly.
could enjoy elements rather than being on a
I
treadmill.
can
or something.
remember in the mess hall when we were eating, it was so hot that we would be eating and the sweat would be pouring off our faces at the time.
Yep.
Cole Porter was the
Oh, cool.
man who had a house
Okay.
near Williamstown.
Wow.
And that was pointed out to us as we ran by it.
Did you have, besides church, did you have other times during training that you were sort of allowed to go for leave and other things?
Well, it was a fairly intensive training, as I remember. We were probably tired enough that we went back to our barracks
Yeah.
and either wrote letters home or fell asleep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And at that point, it's maybe a good follow-up on the letters home. How frequently would you hear or would you send communication back, as you recall?
I'd say maybe once a week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Good.
And I had a girlfriend I would write to.
Okay. Yep. Well, and that's and at that stage, did you have to pay for postage in the as a military person?
You know, I can't answer that because I don't recall.
Yeah, I was just curious. That's more Steve's curiosity than anything else.
I don't recall. That's a good question.
Yeah, there are a whole lot of those kind of things that are quite intriguing. So you had a variety of folks that you were working with then over this period of time. Do you recall any instructors, any folks?
We didn't do any flying at Williams, but the next base we went to was a Catholic college called Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And we had a half a day there of a combination of athletics and ground school. And then we climbed on a bus and we went over the hills to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where we were assigned to a little group that I was in. Were 6 of us with an instructor, a civilian instructor, whose name was Bill Hennessy. He was probably in his 30s, seemed to us like an old man. And we sat out on a bench in a farm field, which was mowed. It was a grass type field, mowed. And Bill was our instructor, and he flew. His plane was a Taylor Cub, and that was the first plane that we flew in. He'd take us up a few times, and then we eventually soloed.
Okay.
And I can remember he was a cigar smoker. And when our group soloed, one of the men, who was at Dartmouth, all of us were Dartmouth at the time, had difficulty in landing, in coming down. He didn't quite get the proper altitude to land down in the field. He was up too high. And after about 3 attempts to come down, Hennessy got up off the bench, and I remember the cigar was going back and forth in his mouth, and he walked out into the field, and he motioned to this young pilot, tried to get him to come down, and finally he did. He got down far enough that he landed, but he was kind of late getting down, and he wound up in a fence at the end of the field. And as a result of that, he had to go through a hearing. Anybody who ever had an accident had to be in a hearing.
Yes.
And the poor guy was asked the question, why didn't you put on your brakes so you didn't have to hit the fence at the end of the field? He said, I did put them on, but I slipped through the cow flops on the field and skidded into the fence. Well, the poor guy was washed out.
Oh, is that right?
And he had to go as a second-class seaman to Great Lakes Naval Station in Chicago.
And he was a Dartmouth guy,
Yep.
but he had to go to Great Lakes. And just from that one incident was all it took to wash him out?
That's all it took, yeah.
Wow. Wow. So it's serious
Yeah.
business. You knew
Yeah,
you
oh,
were...
yes.
Hey,
Well, before we were finished in our training, I would say maybe 25% or thereabouts were washed out.
okay. Yep, so 25% washout. Had you flown ever before that time?
Only as a passenger,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And is that true for most of the guys, as
I
you
think
recall
so,
it from Dartmouth?
yes, yeah.
So this was not an experienced group before working with Bill, but by the
Correct.
time you were done with Bill, at least that Taylor Cub, you were
That's
landing it
right.
just fine and taking off without trouble.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so this was just a big open field, and
Yep.
so there were other groups that were elsewhere in the area
exactly.
doing the same kind of thing.
And at the end of that time, we would get on the bus and go back to Mount St. Mary's.
Wow.
Yeah, and the one thing that we were given was to take a dollar bill, and Bill Hennessy, our instructor, signed it and dated it, and all of us 6 signed the dollar bill.
Is that right?
Yeah, for each other.
Oh, how
So
great.
that was our graduation.
What a great idea.
Yeah. And I don't think we were there for more than a month and a half or so.
Okay.
That was our first stint in flying.
Yeah, did Bill come up with that idea, or who?
It was called a short snorter.
A short snorter.
Yeah. And I think we all of us had them, no matter where we were flying.
Do you still have yours?
Yes, I do.
That would be interesting to see sometime.
Yeah, if I can find it, I'll
Okay.
bring it in and
Yeah.
let you see it.
Okay, that would be great.
It's like photograph. I had photograph of my brother and me, and I was in uniform, but I can't find it.
Yeah. Well, someday, if those things
Yeah.
sort of come into your
I'll
possession,
let
let
you
me
know.
know, because that'd
Sure
be
will.
interesting, especially something like that, because as you say, you've got the other 5 guys and Bill's signature there,
Yeah,
reminding you of those days. And you said about how many weeks?
I would say we were there probably 6 weeks.
I thought that's what you
That's a
said.
guess.
Yeah. So that was sort of your beginning
Flying.
training. Yeah, beginning flying activity.
And then the next base was a large base. Am I doing too much detail?
Oh, no, this is perfect. Thank you.
Next base was at the University of North Carolina,
Okay.
Chapel Hill. That was the University of North Carolina.
Mhm.
Beautiful campus. There were hundreds of us from all over, not just the Dartmouth men. And not all of our group from Mount St. Mary's went to Chapel Hill.
Hmm.
Some others went to different bases. So
Okay.
our Dartmouth group of roughly 75 or so men were divided up when we left Mount St. Mary's.
Okay. And so they weren't guaranteeing you that the Dartmouth guys would all stay together, even though at the beginning it
They
sort of
told
had
us
sounded that way.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Now, did the squadron, before I forget, did the squadron you ended up working with, were they all Dartmouth men?
Not
So-
one,
Okay.
not one.
Oh, is that right? So this was the time at which, when you went to UNC Charlotte, or Chapel Hill, that's the time that it now switched, and some were
Actually-
Dartmouth, some were not.
Actually, Steve, when we went from Williams College to Mount St. Mary's, some of them went to other
Okay.
colleges too. So
Yeah.
I might have been wrong about that.
No, I don't think I was. I think I was leaping to that one.
Yeah.
So the reality is, as time went along, there
Every
was less
time-
Dartmouth affiliation.
Every time we went to a new base, we were divided up more
Okay.
and more.
Yeah, yeah.
So at Chapel Hill, was a very interesting program. We did, again, half a day of ground school. They had coaches, college coaches from all over the country centered there at Chapel Hill. It was a mecca of famous coaches. And we had, in athletics, half a day, we had everything from wrestling to boxing to soccer, football, you name it, all kinds of sports.
Huh. Okay.
I'll never forget, I was up against a young fellow who was about my size. He was a boxer. He'd had a lot of boxing training. And I went in against him, and he knocked me out 2 different days.
Oh my.
Yeah. I found out it wasn't too bad to be knocked out. You didn't know anything about it. You just went out.
Wow. So you experienced a true knockout in the boxing ring.
Twice.
Did you go in a third day?
I went in, I put headgear on, but it didn't help a bit.
Okay.
He knocked me out again. We had tough going. I remember playing soccer, and I collided with a guy on the other team. Our shins hit together, and he broke his leg.
Wow.
On that. Things like that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he had to go to the hospital, and of course he was sent back. He didn't get washed out, but he was.
Right. He had to wait for another school. Wow. Wow. So, any coach that you remember? I mean, was there somebody?
No,
okay, you knew the names at the time. I mean,
we had different coaches,
mm-hmm.
maybe 6 or 8 different coaches,
Yep.
depending on what we were doing.
Right. Well, I was trying to think of like a famous boxer or something like that. But
well,
as you describe it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The coaches were famous in their own right.
Yep. Wow. And then, so at this stage, did your flight training still classroom related as
No
well?
No flying at Chapel Hill.
Oh, okay.
None.
All right.
It was all just athletics and ground school.
Okay.
And we were there probably 3 months, I'm just guessing.
And what did ground school consist of?
Well, the same courses. We also had identification, which meant they would flash enemy planes or even our own planes quickly on the screen, and we would have to learn to identify which planes they were.
Okay.
Enemy, friendly,
Yep.
and the type of plane.
Yep.
Recognition, they called it.
Okay, recognition.
Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Okay, and then from Chapel Hill?
Went to Peru, Indiana. And by that time it was middle of winter.
The middle of winter in Peru, Indiana. What was that like?
Well, I'll tell you what it was like. We were flying open cockpit planes.
Oh,
And that was, again, more flying than anything else. We did have some ground school,
okay.
but mostly flying. And we had wool, sheepskin, wool. They were leather one-piece suits with wool lining.
Oh, wow.
Sheepskin lining.
Okay.
The helmets were all sheepskin lined.
Mm-hmm.
And the instructor sat in the front of the plane, and the cadet would be behind him in the other cockpit.
Okay.
And those were called steerman training planes.
Okay, steerman training. Okay.
And it was cold.
I'll bet.
And we would get up, and that was very interesting flying, because we would have takeoffs and landings and go out into the country where they would have a small landing circle that we would come down on and take off.
Yep.
We also did a lot of stunt flying rolls, snap rolls, slow rolls, dives, all kinds of aerobatics.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first really exciting flying that we had. I had a roommate who crashed. He survived, but he was hospitalized. And I can remember the Navy had to contact his parents, told him that he was hospitalized,
Mm-hmm.
and they somehow or another contacted me.
Okay. Oh, the parents
Yeah.
contacted you.
And I said, well, he was well enough that he could get out of bed and walk to the bathroom.
That had to be comforting
Yeah,
for them,
yeah.
just to know that he was in that kind of shape.
Exactly.
Wow.
They hadn't told them that, you see.
Just that he had been in a crash.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they didn't know really.
So now so is this via letter then that you were doing that?
A letter? No,
Yes. It was
telephone.
a phone call.
Yeah.
Okay, so they got in touch with you via phone.
Yeah.
Found out that he was okay, that he could at least walk to the
Right.
bathroom. Wow. Oh. So the communication levels were not high
That's-
from the military directly
That's
to
correct.
the family.
That's right.
Okay.
He was a roommate, you see.
Right, yes, yes. Now, did, at that point, so after his crash, did he have to then wait for another group
Oh,
before?
yeah. I lost him, and we never were together again.
Yep, yep. Do you recall his name? This
I'll think
isn't
of
a quiz, I just
No,
was curious.
I'll think of his name.
Yeah, because sometimes having those names, he may be looking at these tapes as well. And so
Yeah.
you never know when there are connections made, and I think
Right.
it's just nice to know. So no, it's not a quiz in any sense.
Sorry, I don't recall,
Oh,
but
no, that's all right.
uh,
I
he was a good friend at the time.
yes. Well, they're friends for a reason, friends for a season,
That's right,
And
yeah.
and this was one of those reasons.
Exactly.
Friends, no doubt. Okay, so then from Peru.
Pensacola was the next,
Okay.
and that was advanced training. That's where we got our wings.
Okay.
And we were there for pretty close to 6 months. And we flew to about 4 different fields while we were there, different airfields where we were stationed.
Okay.
I happened to be very lucky, Steve, because they had a system of, it started in Peru. We were given our training, and then we would be tested at the end of a given period of training. And the instructor would come down after a flight of inspecting you and testing you.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd go to a blackboard, and you'd stand there waiting. And he would mark an arrow up, which was you passed, or a down check, which was an arrow down. If you got 2 arrows down, you were washed out. Everybody that I knew of occasionally got an arrow. I was very fortunate and never got an arrow. A
Wow.
down check, that
Yep.
is.
Yep.
Mine were all up checks. And so when I got to Pensacola, they put me into a flight group of, the groups were all 6-man groups. And I was in with 5 men who were graduates of Annapolis. They were already officers.
Okay.
They were ensigns and lieutenant JGs.
Okay. Wow.
2 of them were Marines, in fact, and 3 of them were Navy men. And I was a lowly cadet, but I was assigned to be trained with them.
Oh, wow.
And because they were officers, we got through. It was an accelerated course, so I was very lucky to get through more quickly than the typical cadet.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was an experience. We had a lot of flying. These were single-engine planes, and you didn't have an instructor in with you.
Okay.
You were the only pilot.
Do you recall what kind of plane it would have been at that
It
time?
was called an AT-6 was the Army designation, and the Navy called them SNJs.
SNJ.
Yeah.
Got it.
And they were a much more powerful single-engine plane than any we had flown at Peru.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
was a biplane, two-wing.
Peru was
plane.
biplane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
As you
these
were
were-
describing it, it sort of sounded that way.
Yeah.
The open cockpit.
exactly.
Yep.
And the SNJ was a low-wing monoplane, single
Okay.
wing. And we had all kinds of gunnery, some simulated aircraft carrier landings, but it was all simulated, all done on land.
Okay.
I remember we had to muster for an inspection from time to time, and one time I had sent my uniform to a dry cleaner on the base, a young guy who was in a shack, and that was the dry cleaning place.
Okay.
So I didn't have the proper uniform that they required during that inspection. And I came with an open shirt, khakis without a necktie, and I was penalized, and I had to march around the barracks for about 3 hours
Wow.
for every day of a week,
Oh my goodness.
as I had demerits as a result of it. It didn't interfere with my flying, but that was
Wow.
just a sideline.
It was pretty serious
Oh,
business here
yeah,
when you
yeah.
didn't. And you were trying to do a good thing by getting your uniform.
Exactly. Yeah.
clean. Wow. And so this was just some guy who would do the
He was
cleaning on
running
the
the
side.
dry cleaning place there.
Okay. Wow. So did you keep getting it dry cleaned after that?
No, I never went back to him.
Exactly. A week's worth of marching for
That's
3
right.
hours would say, okay, I'm not doing that
Yeah.
anymore. Yep. Okay, good.
Had to have a gun on my shoulder as we were marching.
Okay, for
Yeah.
all those hours.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh. So, Pensacola for about 6 months.
Yeah.
Peru for about how long? Was
I
that it?
think we were there maybe 2 to 3 months.
Okay. Yep. So now you're back.
so-
Almost. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
We had a group, we were flying at 6, as I'd explained, in a group, but our graduating class probably had about 36 men in it.
Okay.
Parents came down to be there,
Mm-hmm.
and we were given 3 weeks leave to go back home after graduating.
Okay.
But I had signed up to be a fighter pilot, and everybody, all the cadets in that class, were told that they were going to be torpedo bombing pilots,
Okay.
me included.
All right.
So after our leave, which was 3 weeks or so at home, we were ordered to go to Opelika Naval Air Station near Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And that was a station where nothing but TBFs rather, excuse me, TBF Grumman torpedo planes were there. We were operational training at that place.
Okay.
TBFs were made by Grumman, and later General Motors got into the act, and they made the same plane, but it was really a better plane. We liked it better when we got out into the fleet because it was a more powerful engine, just 10% more powerful, but
Okay.
it made a difference.
So the GM engine was 10% more powerful.
Yeah,
Okay. And Grumman, is that, was that sort of a...
they were the ones who developed that plane.
Okay.
They were the only ones who made it at first.
Mm-hmm.
But as the
Okay.
war went on, General Motors got into making planes.
Yeah, yeah. Like a lot
Instead of automobiles, they made thousands of planes.
Yes, yeah. Just
We really
remarkable.
geared up.
Yeah, yeah. That's a huge, our country just in general changed its entire perspective. didn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So now you're in Fort Lauderdale, you're training this particular plane,
Yep.
and you're now, have you joined a particular group? Is this the group that you're going to be staying with?
No,
Okay.
not necessarily.
All right, so it's still in the training stage, you're learning this
Right.
plane, knowing exactly how it's going to operate for when you
Correct.
are in action.
We went out over the water, and we had torpedoes. Although at the Battle of Midway, as I might have explained to you, they changed, and no more launching of torpedoes by air. That was 6 months after Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm,
I was not in at that time. I
right,
was too young to be in then.
yep,
So the plane we were flying was designated as a bomber, and we had depth charges for anti-submarine work.
okay,
And we would go out over the water, and they'd have targets for us to shoot at, and we'd bomb them and strafe them with guns,
okay,
that sort of thing.
yep. So your targets were sub-targets that you, and then the strafing was something that would be at some
Yeah.
kind of ship above.
Might have been a submarine on the surface,
Okay, yep,
or it could have been on an island occupied by Japanese.
yes, yes,
So we were practicing that sort of thing.
okay, yep, yep. And how long in Fort Lauderdale roughly?
I think we were there about 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and we went from there to California, went to a base at, I'll think of the name of it, near Santa Barbara.
Okay,
And we were there for a month. It was like a motel on the edge of an airfield.
okay,
And we were to be flying there,
mm-hmm,
TBFs,
okay.
but it rained every day. Every day, solid rain.
Oh my,
This was January,
okay.
and we never got into the air. We never flew.
So they wouldn't put the plane up in the rain?
We were allowed to go into Los Angeles on a weekend, but we had to be out there. We couldn't be in overnight. We had to
Okay.
go
Oh,
in by
mhm.
bus or car and
Okay.
back out. And we played a lot of poker during the week while we were in those rooms.
Wow. Because you just had to sit
Yeah.
there every day, you look
Yeah.
out and it's raining again.
Exactly.
Wow.
That was for the birds.
Yeah.
Opelika was the name of the base.
Okay.
Opalocka. And we were very happy to leave that.
Yes.
And we went from there to a place called it was near Palm Springs, California,
Okay.
and the name of it was, oh God, I'll think of it. It had to do with temperatures. It was so hot. It was the middle of the desert. And we couldn't fly during the day because the metal on the plane was so hot, we couldn't touch it.
Wow.
But we would fire up about 10 o'clock at night when it cooled down.
Mm-hmm.
And the desert at night got pretty chilly.
Yes.
We were sleeping in barracks. By morning, we'd wake up, and there would be sand on top of the blanket on the bed. We'd always have blankets. It was that cold.
Yeah, cold.
But we would fly from about 10 o'clock to maybe 2 a.m.,
Okay.
and then we'd go to bed.
Wow.
Thermal was the name of the place, Thermal, California.
Okay.
And years later, I went back, and Thermal was, as I say, a desert and nothing but a naval airstrip when we were there.
Okay.
And just nothing but desert around it.
Yep.
And when I went back, there were all kinds of vegetables being grown.
Huh.
They had converted into truck farming
Okay.
and had irrigation.
Okay. Yep.
So there were thousands of acres of irrigated land from which they were growing all kinds of vegetables.
Yep.
But it wasn't that way when we were flying. We learned a lot of night flying, which was good experience because at night you can't necessarily see inside the cockpit. You had to learn to feel all of the different things that you were using in the cockpit.
Yep. So there were some of the what do I want to call it? Not instruments necessarily, but all the activities. It wasn't lit up in such a way.
Correct.
That you could. So it had to be by feel.
By feel.
Okay.
And you got to know the plane pretty well by feel.
Yep. Yep.
And night flying was very challenging, but it sharpened your flying.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And at this point, were you now landing on sort of simulated aircraft?
Not at Thermal.
Okay. I
We
realize.
landed on airstrips.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And no Dartmouth guys there
Okay.
in the group.
Yep. At that point, you no dirt. So that guarantee had long since gone away.
That's right. From there, we went to Los Alamitos. There was a base called Alameda near San Francisco. It was not Alameda. It was Los Alamitos.
Okay.
And it was inland from Long Beach, California,
Right.
maybe about 10 miles inland.
Okay.
So we were right on the coast there, and we had a lot of flying out over the water, out over the Pacific. We go out and fly around a big island that was there, and it was interesting flying.
Mm-hmm.
From there, we went to Coronado, San Diego,
Yes.
which was a big Navy base on an island.
Yep.
The climate there was beautiful.
Yes.
Not terribly hot, but and we didn't have snow or anything like that. Just beautiful climate, maybe in the 70s most of the day. And we saw aircraft carriers there, and we qualified on an aircraft carrier called the Saratoga, which was a famous old carrier.
Yes.
But we had night qualifications on it landing at nighttime
Mm-hmm.
on the Sarah, as we called it.
On the Sarah.
Yeah, and that was, once we landed 3 different times. Oh, when we were at Opelika, I forgot to tell you, we did have landings and takeoffs on a carrier there.
Okay.
We probably landed maybe a dozen times.
So you'd already had the carrier experience, but not
Daytime.
the night carrier
Correct.
experience. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So these last few locations, were you just there, say, for a month or so?
Yeah.
Or, okay,
At
so relatively
Coronado, it
quick.
was very short.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing we did was to board a hospital ship, which was empty. I say empty, it didn't have any patients on it because it was headed out to the Pacific.
Okay.
It had brought patients back to the U.S., wounded
Mm-hmm.
sailors and so
Yeah.
forth. This ship had what we called BAMs, Marine Women, on it.
Ah.
There were probably 50 Marine women, and we were not allowed to fraternize in any way.
Wow.
Only the ship's crew were allowed to be with them. And they were up on an upper deck, and we were down below. And I remember one night we were all bunked in our sleeping quarters, and we heard this screaming. And a woman, one of these Marine women, came running through, and one of our guys, a big guy, grabbed her with his arm, and she was being chased by some ship's crew member. He rescued her, and I don't know what we did with the crew member, but probably gave him,
Mm-hmm.
knocked him out or whatever.
Yes.
And he went back to his quarters, as she did too.
Yep.
But that was the only exciting thing that ever happened on that. That was about a 10-day trip
Okay.
out to Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Wow.
And we went from Pearl to Maui, the island of Maui.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, I was put together with another cadet whose name was Bob Olson, and a lieutenant who had been in the service earlier. He'd been out on a tour of the Pacific
Okay.
in 1944. He had been involved on a carrier, and they attacked and took over Saipan in the Marianas.
Okay.
So he came back, and he was kind of the leader of our group of three. Bill Jeffers was his name.
Bill
He
Jeffers.
was a Canadian, actually, but involved in the U.S. Navy.
Okay.
And Bill was an okay pilot, but he was a big guy, and he was kind of a rough pilot. When he did anything with the plane, it was never smooth. It was always kind of jerky and rough.
Okay.
And we flew formations with him.
Okay. So
And
three planes then?
3 planes.
3 planes in formation.
So he was our section leader, as we called him.
Okay.
And we did all kinds of training, particularly whenever an aircraft carrier came from the Pacific through on its way to the States.
Okay.
They would have to take us and give us experience in landing and taking off of their carriers.
Okay.
And we did some anti-submarine patrol work training on that as well.
Okay. Yep.
And we did some bombing training on targets on the water.
All right. So, and how long in Maui?
Just only a month or so.
Okay. Yep.
And we went from there to a Navy airfield called Barber's Point on Hawaii, Honolulu, just outside of Honolulu,
Okay.
on Oahu. And we were there for about 4 months training.
Okay.
And most of the training was carrier landings, takeoffs. And this was a group called CV-100. They were all replacement pilots. And we became replacement pilots, meaning that if a pilot out in the fleet was shot down or lost, we would be given orders, the three of us, to go to that carrier, and we were based there temporarily until they got pilots to be there on a permanent basis.
Okay.
So we went from one to another carrier in our work. And because we were new boys on the block, so to speak, we would be on a new carrier for maybe 3 weeks. And we were given a lot of night and a submarine patrol work with the fleet.
So you sort of got whatever they wanted to give you is
We
what
got
it came
night
down
flying.
to. Yep.
But it was good for us because it sharpened our flying.
Mm-hmm.
And we had planes in the air. The fleet, we were in the fleet at that time, our task forces, which were smaller but still made up of aircraft carriers. And they always had planes in the air day and night. There would always be 4 planes up in the air going in different directions in anti-submarine patrol work.
Okay. So you're sort of covering all quadrants over the course of any 24-hour time period.
Correct, they were quadrants.
Okay.
And we go out for about 3 hours and fly courses and then come back to the carrier.
Okay.
So we had a lot of night flying, carrier landings and takeoffs.
And when you're up there, what are you looking for?
We're looking for submarines, enemy submarines.
Is there any how would you find, how would they sort of show themselves?
Well, they would, if we ran into any, they would normally be on the surface.
Okay.
And they would see us probably before we'd see them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had, coming out of the exhaust of our plane, there was always some flame that they could see.
Yep.
And they might have been able to hear us as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we were experimenting. I might have told you about this when you were here before with what we call sonobuoys. And each of our planes would carry 5 sonobuoys. And they were about 8 inches in diameter and 3 feet long.
Okay.
And they had on them a radio receiver. And we would drop those if we saw a submarine. We dropped those in a pattern of about 2 miles square.
Mm-hmm.
You envision the size of a square, 2 miles
Yes.
long, and 1 in the middle. And we dropped the sonobuoys, 1 on each corner of the square, 1 in the middle.
Yep.
And then we would tune in on each one, which had a separate frequency.
Huh.
And we could hear the noise, they called it a cavitation, which was the noise of the propeller of the submarine,
Okay.
which was under the surface.
Yes.
And it was so sensitive that you could actually pick up voices of men in those submarines. You couldn't understand what they were saying, but you knew they were human voices.
Wow.
And if a submarine to go up or down in the water, they had like wings up in the front of them, and you could hear it go when they changed the wings.
Yep.
That all came through on the sonobuoys.
Interesting.
And as we tuned into those, the louder the signal we got from each sonobuoy, we knew the loudest one is where that submarine was, nearer.
Yes. Yes.
So we could trace the submarine
Mm-hmm.
by it getting less loud from one and more loud to another. And then we could drop our depth charges in the water.
Yes.
But one of the nice things about getting a submarine to go under the surface, they couldn't go as fast as our fleet would go. So they would lag back, and they were no longer a threat to our fleet.
Okay. So in one sense, just getting them to go down was a good thing because it was going to slow their progress.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So sort of a multifaceted activity.
We
One,
would,
you want to get rid of them, but
we could drop our depth charges, but it was at nighttime not always easy to know if you got a hit.
Mhm.
Once in a while, in the daytime, you could see if something came up to the surface
Yes.
that, maybe you got a hit.
Mm-hmm.
But at nighttime, it was different.
Yes.
But at least they always went under the surface if you spotted them,
Yep.
or if they spotted you.
Did they have running lights then that you would see, or was it just the image
They
of
never,
them?
they never had lights, nor did our aircraft carriers have running lights.
Yep.
And we could not signal one another by radio. That radio silence. If we did anything to get on the radio, we'd be court-martialed.
Wow.
So
Wow.
radio silence was a must.
Okay.
And the only time we saw lights on the carriers was when we were straight away coming in for a landing. We could see little lights on the outline of the edge of the flight deck,
Yep.
which helped us identify the height and where the flight deck was. But if you were a mile away in the air, you wouldn't see it.
And so how did you, what kind of equipment did you have to know where that aircraft carrier was?
Well, when we took off and we were in the air for 3 hours, we had a plotting board under the dashboard, and we bring it out and we would put on that plotting board the course of the carriers, and we just always hoped that they wouldn't take a dramatic change of course.
Yes.
And usually they didn't. If they changed course, it might have been a few degrees.
Mm-hmm.
But we always sort of prayed for a moonlit night because you could see a distance. You could spot them maybe 6 or 8 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
But on a cloudy night, it was not easy. And we get within maybe where we thought they were a mile or 2 away.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were not there, we would go into what we call a sector search.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd do a square that was expanded bigger and bigger until we found it.
Because again, you're doing radio silence, so there's no way for you in
No
any
way.
way to know what's going on. And so are you in threes at this point? So
Yeah.
the three of you are all flying together?
No,
Just
we
you
were
at that
single,
point.
Single.
So you're out. That's what I thought I was understanding, but I wanted to be
If
sure.
we were on a mission, a bombing mission,
Then
we'd
you'd
be a
three.
section of 3.
Got it. But when you're out doing this, you're out by yourself.
That's right.
Do you recall any incident where, that cloud was such that you're just sort of saying, that cloud cover,
Oh, I had to make some searches. And then you'd have to be sure you got the right carrier. But they were close enough together, they might have been half a mile apart or a mile
Okay.
apart. And we could then see which was which. And they
Okay.
had big numbers painted on the deck.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was on carrier number 12, I'd see number 12, and
Yeah.
I'd get in a position to land on it.
Okay. So did you do a flyover one time before you would actually land ordinarily?
Yeah, you'd fly over enough to identify
Mm-hmm.
which was your carrier,
Yep. Okay.
and then you come in on it.
Wow. Wow. It just astounds me to think about, wondering, where is that fleet on a particularly dark night with cloud cover and other things going on?
It was hairy.
Oh, I can only
As we
imagine.
used to say, you never fall asleep doing it.
I'm
And
certain.
another interesting thing was that because the carriers had a number of planes they wanted to have ready to take off
Mhm.
in case they were attacked or anything, they liked to have planes on the deck ready to go. But how would you take off from a whole deck if you had planes in the way.
Yes.
So what they had were catapults. A catapult was up near the bow of the ship. There were two on each side, on the port and the starboard, the left and the right sides. They were about 100 feet long. It was a track, and it had a cable in it with a bridle that had two big hooks. They would hook that bridle onto the plane, the landing gear of the plane. And we'd be at the back of the catapult, one plane at a time. And you get ready to go, and you give the signal to the operator of the catapult who is on the deck. And you give it full throttle of the plane.
Okay.
And then you give him a signal with your hand, and it would pull you. You'd have, of course, full throttle, and your propeller be going full blast, and it would pull you in about 100 feet. 2.5 seconds, we'd be going 100 miles an hour. That'd be 90 knots.
Yep.
So we had our heads up against a cushion in the back of our cockpit because the thrust was so great.
Yep.
And then coming down for landing, the reverse was true. We had shoulder straps. And we had to lock, those were, as they are in an automobile, flexible. You could go forward if you had to reach something in the cockpit. But when you're coming in for a landing, you lock those tightly against it.
Yep.
So when the hook from your tail caught the cable in your landing, you were thrust up against the dashboard, but with your shoulder straps, you were held back enough you didn't hit the...
Yep.
You'd have knocked yourself out if you'd hit the dashboard.
Sure. Sure.
The catch was so great.
Yep. And you called it the hook, right? So that you had to, so you had to put your plane in a certain spot.
Oh yeah, there was a landing signal officer on the corner of the deck, the aft corner. So as you approached, he would give you various signals. For instance, if everything was coming in just right, his flags would be out like this.
Okay.
If you were too high, he'd put his flags, I've got shoulder problem, put his flags up like that
Okay.
until you got lower. If you were too low, he'd be down here
Yep.
and you'd get your plane up higher.
Okay.
If you were too slow, you were in danger of spinning out, he'd go like this.
Okay. Get some extra speed going.
Get your speed.
Wow.
If you were too fast, he had one out like that and one up there, and it'd slow down a little.
Wow.
But you were always going maybe 3 to 4 knots above stalling speed. If you got to stalling speed, your wings would get very, very floppy. Your plane would be floppy, and you could just stall out, get into the water.
Yep.
Now, occasionally that happened.
I was going to ask.
On takeoff, occasionally a pilot would go in to the drink, and there was always a destroyer or a destroyer escort about a half a mile behind the carrier.
Okay.
And hopefully they would rescue a pilot who would get out of his plane. The plane would go down, and he'd be there with his Mae West on, and they would hopefully rescue him.
Okay.
Whenever they rescued a pilot, the carrier would grind up, make ice cream, and send back gallons of ice cream for the crew of the destroyer.
Okay.
That was
Thank you very much, guys.
That was about all a pilot's life was worth. A few gallons of ice cream.
A few gallons of ice cream. Did that happen very often?
Well, hopefully not, but it did occasionally. Yeah.
So you'd have those situations, and
When you were catapulted off on a takeoff, the plane would have, as I had mentioned, maybe 90 knots, which was enough to keep it airborne, but occasionally it would drift down 10 or 15 feet toward the water. If you had an engine that wasn't working quite right, you could go in the drink.
Okay.
And
Wow.
then hopefully you'd be off to the side of the carrier so that it didn't run over you.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
you could lose your life if
Sure.
if the carrier went right over the top of you.
Yep. Do you have any experiences that?
I never went into the ocean.
Good. Good. You want to stay up above. Yep.
I had one experience where my hook did not catch the cables. There were 5 or 6 cables as you approached the carrier landing deck. And you went a few feet, maybe 20 feet farther, there'd be another cable across. So there'd be a group of maybe 5 to 6 cables. And then if your hook didn't catch, they would quickly put up a barrier, which was like a fence with 3 or 4 cables across the deck.
Okay.
And your plane would hit that barrier, and it would tip you up so that you'd be looking straight down at the deck. There would be personnel and planes up forward of that barrier, and that's why they put the barrier up,
I see.
to keep you from running into them.
Yes.
I did have one experience of hitting a barrier one time,
Okay.
and it was no fun.
Yeah.
My plane went into a vertical position. The propeller had a sudden stoppage of the engine when it hit the deck. And I had 2 crew members in with me,
Okay.
and the plane came bang back down again.
Wow.
And the commander up above on the bridge would go like that,
Yep. Yep.
and you'd swear to yourself.
Yep. And yet, when you think about the number of times you did it and didn't have that trouble,
Exactly.
you know.
And
it's-
what caused it was that when I came down, usually you're in a full stall landing, your plane is not airworthy, and it comes down.
Right.
Well, you have to, you dip your plane downward and then put the tail down. Well, what had happened to me was I dipped it, my wheels hit the deck too early, and it bounced the plane.
Got
And
it.
I was airborne, and that's the reason the hook didn't
Didn't
catch.
engage. Yes. Yep.
So that was the only accident I
Okay.
ever had.
Yep. Yep.
But it was embarrassing, and it does happen.
Right. Right. Yeah, you think about a baseball player hitting 300, 7 out of 10 times
That's right.
he's not getting the hit.
And this was after the war was over, and we were practicing landings
Okay.
outside of Pearl Harbor,
Uh-huh.
and we were about to come home. We didn't know when we were going to get transportation back home. We'd come in from the Pacific where we were in operations, and I said to the landing signal officer, who they took my plane, and I had to go back talk with him. And I said to him, I made the mistake of saying, do you think this is going to interfere with my getting back home? And he reported that to our squadron leader.
Oh my.
And the squadron leader gave me hell. I said, John, why did you say that?
Yeah.
I said, well, I made a mistake.
Right. At that moment, I just wanted to know.
Yeah. Well, what happened later was that the 3 of us got orders to get into Honolulu and meet a ship which would take the 3 of us. It was an oil freighter. It held only fuel oil for the carriers and other ships.
Okay.
And it was on the way back to the States. We got there just in time. They were leaving the dock, and they had to put down from their crane a platform on the dock. As they were going out, we climbed on the platform with our duffel bags, the 3 of us. They lifted us up, and on we went.
As it's leaving.
Yeah, so we made it.
Wow.
And it took about 10 to 12 days to get back to the States.
Okay.
We went through the Panama Canal.
Ah, okay.
I had the first and only woman barber I'd ever had. We stopped at Cologne on the other side of the Panama Canal, and the ship was to be there for overnight. And we went into a barber shop. We needed a haircut, and they had women barbers.
Huh. Only woman barber you ever had.
Yeah.
That's
These are little sidelines that are not operational, but they're experiences.
I think that's
Another
important.
thing that we had, because we were pilots and the only 3 passengers taken on that ship, we had the ship's crew, and we ate in the mess hall, which was the term you'd use for where you had your food. And I'll remember the first time I went in there, somebody in the crew said, "Sit down." And it was a long table, maybe 15 feet long, chairs on each side of it. And I sat down, and one of the crew members opposite me a few minutes later looked over my head and he said, "Take it easy, take it easy." I looked around, and there was a crew member standing behind me, and he looked mad as hell. And what it was I was in his chair, which he had been in for 3 years
Oh my.
during the war. That was his chair.
Spot, yes.
God, I got up and said, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Yep.
He didn't speak to me for about 3 days.
Wow.
He was so angry.
And this other person hadn't told you that
No.
had been his spy.
No.
Oh my.
So we were given chairs that were not assigned to anybody
Yeah.
after that. And the other thing I remember so well was the captain of the ship had us up to he was actually on the bridge. And he said, "Come on up, I've got some music here I'd like to have you listen to." This was on the bridge where he was piloting, and they had helmsmen doing this often, but the captain occasionally would do it. So we were on the other side of the Panama Canal, south of Cuba, headed toward Texas. And we were listening to this music. It was night, dark as could be. And all of a sudden, one of the 3 of us looked out and said, "There are lights out there." And the captain looked, he said, "Oh my God." He wasn't at the wheel. Our ship was doing circles. And there was another ship that had gone by us, maybe a mile away. And the captain said, "Oh my God, he could have been court-martialed for that." So he said, "Look, you guys, go down to your quarters. I've got to take hold of the helm here." So that was no laughing matter. That was a screw-up of the captain.
Yep.
He was very embarrassed by that. But
Oh, I'm sure.
we finally came into Galveston Harbor, and we went up a canal, and there were oil rigs on both sides of the canal. And we thought, well, this is quite a homecoming, different from what we expected.
Yes.
There was no band there to say, "Welcome back." We were out in the sticks, in the oil fields. And that's where this ship got its oil from the rigs.
Okay.
And they had to signal the Navy Yard back at Galveston to send a jeep out to carry us back in. So we got in, we got the first train out to our respective places. Bob Olson lived in Seattle,
Okay.
and Bill Jeffers, the lieutenant, lived in Lebo, Kansas, a little farm town. I came back to Cincinnati.
Yep. Wow.
So that was it.
Yep. So they sent the Jeep, brought you back to base, and then as soon as possible
We
you
got
were
the
on the rail.
first trains out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So you didn't have a lot of time at that point.
No.
But it was mostly you were ready to be back home.
Oh yeah, it
Yeah.
was great to be back.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. So was
Yeah.
there ever anything in Galveston that was sort of a welcome home? You remember a banner of any sort? Or
Nothing.
yeah. How about when you returned to Cincinnati?
We got out at Union Terminal,
Mm-hmm.
and our family were there to greet us.
Yes.
My father and mother, and I think it was my sister,
Okay.
were the only ones there.
Yep.
But the terminal was very busy with people coming and going, you know.
Mm-hmm. And some military, some other,
Oh,
obviously,
mostly
right?
military, I would
Okay.
say.
Mostly
With
military.
families.
Yes.
Yeah,
And how about in Cincinnati? Anything? Obviously, your mom and dad and sister.
yeah.
And but anything in terms of a band, or I realize
No,
this is
no.
well after the.
Right.
The
The
war is
only
finished.
other thing I remember, which was kind of different, was that this was Christmas holiday time,
Okay.
and my girlfriend, whom I was courting, and later married, we were invited to a coming out party, a debutante party at the Netherland Plaza.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at a table there, and the girl whose family had that party for her, had a big band, and the girl was out there dancing up a storm, and I was with my date at the table, and she said, "Aren't you going to dance with the guest of honor?" And I said, "Heck no, she's too big for me." Actually, my wife, that one at the table, I was married to for 20 years. She was killed in an automobile accident. The gal on the disc, excuse me,
Oh, take your time.
she was my second wife.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
Oh my heavens. So that's just
the
unbelievable.
girl was too big.
The girl who was too big for you ultimately became your second wife.
Yeah,
And you spent quite a few years,
35 years.
35 years with her.
Yeah.
So 20 years with your first wife,
Yeah.
killed in an auto accident.
Yep.
And then your second wife was the one that was the debutante
Yeah.
at the party. Oh my heavens. That is
Her
quite a-
father had built the Carew Tower in Netherlands.
Okay.
His name was Jack Emery. He was very well known here. And she died, my wife died about 7 years ago.
Okay, and your first wife's name?
Dorothy Conroy.
Dorothy Conroy.
She was a well-known tennis star.
Okay. And you, so you, you said she was your girlfriend at that point when
Yeah.
you returned. Is she the one that you had been writing with the
Yes.
entire time? So you
Yeah.
had corresponded since 1942.
She was a Smith
right?
College graduate,
Okay.
and Smith was about 2 hours drive from Dartmouth, where I was at college. So I saw her occasionally.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
But then after you went in the service for the entire time, so there was never an opportunity to be together when you were in Florida or...
Well, when I got my wings, I was dating another girl in Cincinnati, a different girl.
Okay,
So I didn't see Dot at that time
okay,
when I had to leave.
yep, gotcha. All right, and then your second wife's name?
Leela Emery.
Oh, that's quite a
Yeah.
story.
I haven't said much about my operational experience out in the fleet, but it was essentially anti-submarine patrol work at night. The three of us were, for a while, waiting in between carriers that we were assigned to. We were in a Quonset hut on Saipan. There were enemy Japanese in the hills. We had taken over Saipan, but they had escaped into the hills of the island. So we were a little bit on guard there.
And I think you, so your duty would be anti-sub.
Submarine.
And then also, if I recall, you were doing some island
bombing.
As well, yes. So there were times where the three of you would be out on mission for a specific island, for a specific sub.
Iwo Jima and Okinawa were being engaged at that time. We did not get up to that area, but we had other islands where the Japanese were involved.
Okay.
And then we chased an aircraft carrier that we had orders to go to. We went down to Guam to get on that carrier. They had just left Guam, headed for Samar and Leyte in the Philippines. And we flew in a DC-3 down there to catch this carrier. And we never got it, never found it. They were too far out of range for us to fly out to them.
Okay.
So we spent some time at Samar and Leyte, where there had been a big, big battle. One of the biggest battles in the Pacific was Leyte Gulf battle.
Okay.
So we saw that area, but we were not in that battle. But we continued to do anti-submarine patrol work even though we were down there.
Yep.
We were flying from Leyte land-based.
Okay. And any guess how many subs you would have identified over the course of the time?
No. Very difficult to know. I think I might have gotten one sub where we saw the stuff come up to the surface.
Yes.
But as I explained, at night you couldn't see it.
But you had a lot of potential with the sonar and everything else that you were doing.
Yeah, I did get a whale.
Oh, is that right?
With a depth charge.
Okay.
That doesn't count.
Well, it looked like a sub in terms of a lot of the activity, yeah?
We saw a lot of American submarines, and we knew they were American at the time.
Okay, so you were getting intelligence to know where our subfleet was,
right?
So that you could say, okay, I don't need to wonder about this.
And they could tell that we were friendly planes, so they didn't necessarily submerge.
Okay, yep. All right, so let's see, what else? So, what was the experience like back at base? So you're spending a lot of time. You mentioned doing some poker playing in the training time.
Was in the States,
right?
Yeah.
What was life like?
Well, let's say we were at Barbers Point Naval Air Station, and we'd be flying during the daytime, sometimes at night. But after we flew, we'd go to the officers' club. And I'm trying to think. When we got our wings at Pensacola, we became officers. We were, from cadets, we were ensigns. And we were still ensigns, except for Bill, who was a lieutenant.
Lieutenant, right.
Bill Jeffers. And we go to the old club, the officers' club, and have plenty of drinks. I was young enough looking at that time. They questioned me as to my age. Was I old enough to have a drink?
Okay.
And Bill always said, oh yeah, he's just young looking. So we spent a lot of time doing that during our off hours.
Yes.
That was about all we did.
Okay.
We also, however, went out to an island, not an island, a beach called Kalanianioi. It was a park and a beach near Barbers Point. And the ocean could be totally calm, but we would swim out, and there would always be a tremendous big wave that would come into that beach, even on a calm day. And we go out in between the breaking of that wave, and we get on the water, and we'd swim and get on the crest of the wave, and it would take us somersaulting into the beach and sweep us maybe 100 feet up into that beach.
Wow.
It was very exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can remember my second wife, Leela, and I were honeymooning in Hawaii. Her son was at college in Honolulu. And I took her out to that beach with her son. And we did the same thing. We got up on the top of the wave coming in. She was wearing a two-piece bathing suit.
She wasn't afterwards.
And when she came flying up, the three of us came up that beach together. The top of her two-piece bathing suit was up to her neck, and her pants were down to her ankles. And she said, "I've had enough of this." So we went back into Pearl Harbor. Oh,
Well,
gosh.
that had to be fun to experience it. Was it as you remembered it?
Same,
Yeah.
always. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
As a matter of fact, one time when we were out there from Barbers Point, a young boy in the service in the Navy was there, and he was he took that big wave, and he lost his life. We worked on him with artificial respiration, but we couldn't get him going.
Wow.
And he died. He was in his teens.
Frustrating.
So it was kind of a mixed bag.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Do you recall what you did or where you were when the war ended?
Yeah, we were actually just off Saipan at the time.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about when Germany surrendered?
Well, that was actually before
Right.
August of '45. So we were at Barbers Point
Okay.
when that happened.
What was the mood at that point? Because you're still in the Pacific. You know things are still going on
We were about
there.
to head out to Saipan and catch a carrier there.
Okay. Was the mood? I mean, was it?
Oh well, we had done the turning point at Midway 6 months after the war began, and we were winning. And when we got to Saipan, we got close to Tinian, which was an island nearby, and when we were flying, we could see the B-29s. They were taking off every 5 minutes, around the clock, 7 days a week, bombing Japan.
Yep.
And Japan was still holding out.
Yep.
It wasn't until we dropped the atom bomb that they gave in.
Yep. How did you feel about the atom bomb?
We were happy to see it happen because it avoided our having to invade Japan. And they projected that there could have been as many as 1 million American men lost if we had invaded Japan.
Yep. Yep. And as you're describing it, to see those B-29s going off at that rate and knowing that there were still people in Japan not going to give up.
They were doing this for months.
Yes.
It was amazing.
Yep.
And the reason we had taken Iwo in Okinawa was that those planes, and so many of them flying as they were, would have problems from time to time. And those were islands on which they could land. We built landing strips for them.
Yes.
So they could land there and get repaired.
Yep. Yep.
My first wife had a cousin killed on Iwo. He was a Marine.
just an incredible experience. So let's see, I've got, so I asked, we talked a little bit about while you were in training and mailing letters and so on. Did that same thing continue while you were out in the Pacific? Were you able to get mail pretty regularly?
Not really, no.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were on new carriers, you know,
Right.
going from one to another, and they couldn't catch up with us.
Yep. Yep. So you were.
Once in a while we'd get it,
Mm-hmm.
but the letters would be pretty late coming.
Yep. And you were a little bit unusual in that regard.
Yeah.
Because you were doing the replacement activity.
Exactly.
Whereas other people who were stationed on a
They
ship.
probably got their mail in pretty
Mhm.
good time.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Good. So recreation, we talked about off-duty. So, we talked about the return home. Was it easy to readjust to civilian life?
Well, I got a job with a company called Atkins. Well, first of all, excuse me, let me explain. I went back to college.
Yep. So
And I finished up.
Okay, so Dartmouth, you just went right back to Dartmouth?
I went back to Dartmouth on the GI Bill of Rights,
So
which was a great help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So the GI Bill provided the last 3 years of
Well, it was just I was given 1 year for my Navy work
Okay.
in ground school in the Navy.
Ah,
So I went back as a junior.
okay. Yep. So
And I had 2 years there, and instead of graduating in 1946, which was my class,
Mhm.
I graduated in 48,
Okay. All right.
2 years later.
So you received a year's worth of for your physics and your ground school, all those kind of things. Did that help in any way in your classwork back at Dartmouth, do you recall?
I don't think it really did because it was so different.
Yes.
Navigation was something I didn't do later. I went
Okay.
to Tuck School of Business,
Oh, okay.
which was a graduate business school, but
Yes.
I graduated with a bachelor's degree from there. It was part of Dartmouth,
Yes.
and they had 2 different ways of doing it. You could stay an extra year and get a master's degree, but I was anxious to get out and get to work.
Yes.
So I left there as a bachelor,
Okay.
1 year at Tuck School, and that was my senior year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I
Okay.
went to work for a company called Atkins and Pierce, which were in the manufacturing of candle wicks.
Okay.
They had braiding machines,
Huh.
and they braided all kinds of cotton into
Mhm.
candle wicks. They sold candle wicks all over the world.
Okay. Yep.
And then about a year later, my father said, "Would you ever like to work for our company, our family business, Hilltop?" And I said, "Yes, as long as I can buy stock in the company and be a
Mm-hmm.
shareholder, I'd like to." So
Okay.
that's when I joined them.
Yes. Yes. And so it was because of the transition back to Dartmouth. It was a little different kind of transition for you back into civilian life
Oh, yes, yeah,
because you were going back into a campus, more of a campus
correct.
environment.
Yeah.
Okay.
There
And-
were other veterans who were there at the time, of course.
Right.
And they
Yeah.
came from all different parts of the service.
Mm-hmm.
Air Force, Army, Marines, Navy, and so forth.
Yeah. Do you recall a lot of discussion about those days compared to?
Well, some of them were married by the time they came back.
Mhm.
And the college had special places for the married guys to live. It was still a men's college.
Okay.
It wasn't co-ed as
Okay.
it is today.
Got it. And so you'd have all variety of folk there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. Have you remained in contact with any of the people you served with?
Well, the fellow who washed out because he couldn't land
Mm-hmm.
lives in Dayton, and I know him and see him occasionally.
Okay.
He's a Dartmouth graduate.
Oh, okay.
He went back,
You went back?
graduated.
Yep.
Nice guy.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
a good, bright fella, too.
Yep.
Yes, there are 3 or 4 that I've
Okay.
kept up with.
Now, like Bill and Bob, have you
Bill
kept
and
with
Bob,
them?
I have not kept up with.
Okay.
But one of my crew members, the plane I flew, had a turret gunner and a tail gunner radioman combination.
Yep.
And I've kept up with the turret gunner.
Okay. Yeah.
Bill Pollock was his name, and Bob Lang was the other one in St. Louis, and I never have kept up with him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So you've arranged some relationships
Yeah.
to continue.
Right.
Now, how about any organizations that you belong to that are military?
Well, I go every first Friday of every month. I go to a breakfast where they refer to the group as Hornets, because there were a number of pilots who served on the aircraft carrier Hornet,
Okay.
and they're in this group,
Ah, okay.
and they've invited me to join them
Excellent. So you get
I would-
together and
every first Friday of the month.
okay.
And they're about not only Navy pilots now, but they have 5 or 6 women who are former nurses
Mm-hmm.
in the service. They have Air Force men. They have some others who are historians who teach, and they teach about the World War II and so forth. They're
Okay.
in the group.
Ah, excellent, excellent. So it's nice to just, is there a program or is it more just a chance for?
One of them who runs the meeting, who chairs it, really is an historian.
Okay,
And he puts together every month what went on 70 years ago all over the world, not just the Pacific, but in Europe, Africa, Italy, and Pacific. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh,
And
that
then,
sounds great.
Then they have a fellow get up and give his military experience, which they do from
Okay.
time to time.
All right. Oh, fabulous. That sounds great.
You know, it's already after 12.
Time
Would you
flies.
join me at lunch?
I'd be pleased to. Yeah.
All right.
You have time for a couple more questions and
Sure,
then some lunch?
absolutely.
Okay,
We don't
perfect.
have to end right now.
Okay, well, super. That would be a pleasure
All right, good.
To enjoy lunch together and because it's amazing how time flies.
Oh, doesn't it?
I
Yeah.
said 90 minutes. I thought, well, we'll probably be okay, but it's a joy to be doing this, John.
Good,
So
good. I've enjoyed it
yeah,
too.
good. So I think we've covered most of the war in terms of the active behavior, and now it's more about reflecting. How would you say the wartime experience affected your life?
Well, I think, as I might have talked with you earlier, you develop a sense of teamwork,
Mm-hmm.
which carries over into business life. I enjoy the relationships that I have with our employees. There are some people, I must confess, who are in business who don't relate to one another.
Mm-hmm.
They've just never had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And they're texting or they're on the computers all the time, but they're not spending time in a relationship with other people.
Yeah.
So I do see that.
Yes. Yeah. That's a really important experience that you had that has just changed the way you behave.
Well, I think it helps you in business
Mm-hmm.
to have a relationship so you can communicate with people.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
if you lack that, you might be looked upon as a loner it can affect your success in business,
Yep.
your ability to be elevated into better positions. Not everyone undergoes that kind of a problem. There are many successful people who tend to be loners that way,
Yep.
and they have a lot to contribute.
Right. But for you personally, it's been, that relationship is critical. And the military experience helped this in a number of ways.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Driving an automobile. I enjoy driving now. I'll drive to Maine alone. Doesn't sound very good to me. It sounds boastful, but I consider myself, and my friend said, gee, you're a good driver.
Yeah.
It's the airplane experience.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's right, because you're out there 3 hours on your own.
Well, if you can land on an aircraft carrier, you can drive a car.
Absolutely. Yep, especially with everything now lit and easily seen compared to your cockpit in the dark with...
It's a slam dunk.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, unbelievable. So I think that relates also to your life lessons then, too, right? Because one of the life lessons is those relationships are critical. Are there other life lessons that you would say you learned from?
Well, you learn that you do make mistakes in life, and you have to persevere and recover from mistakes you made and learn from them. I've heard people say that some people make mistakes twice, and yet the average is probably 3 times.
Yeah.
And you don't always learn.
Exactly.
But the trick is to learn from your mistakes
Yes.
and to be determined enough that you overcome them. You don't melt because of them.
Yep. I like that. Don't melt.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Good. Good. How has the service, your military service, impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, I think war is a very difficult, most difficult thing, to see the loss of life and the injuries, people maimed, terrible. But I think it's very important that our country maintain itself as a safe country where we can have freedom and happiness. And I feel very honestly about the way we're conducting ourselves these days. I'm very unhappy with our administration and the way they've conducted themselves in maintaining relationships around the world. I think we could have helped save lots of lives as we persevered. I'm not for going out and trying to police all of the world, but I think if we pick our places where we know we can do some good and save lives and maybe democratize some countries, help them learn, it's worth doing.
Yep, yep. And you've seen that, I mean, through your World War II experience, you've seen that since in Korea and Vietnam.
Japan.
Japan, yes, yeah. Think about what Japan changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, substantially. Good. What message would you leave, or would you like to leave for future generations who will view and hear this interview?
Well, I would say that, as we had talked a couple of minutes ago, realize that you're going to be living with people on this earth, and I think you should live with integrity, be honest, learn to enjoy and love people, and do what you can to help civilization I think the more you can contribute to society as a whole, the better you are as a person. And you should concentrate on doing that. I think to have a sense of religion is important because there are beings that are more important than us as individuals.
Great. So the last question is the one I almost always ask.
All right.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to talk about?
Wow. How do you give so much of your time to do this? It's your business in a way, but it's
Right.
a sacrifice too.
It's really, yeah, it's a passion.
Yeah,
And I think part of it is the relationship piece that you mentioned. Part of it is getting to know and continuing to open up your own worldview
right.
and seeing things. I like to use the analogy, and your daughter with the camera work, filters. How
Yeah.
each of us filter the information around us. And for me, it's so important to be able to see and filter with a different filter than the one I grew up with, living in
Sure.
Bowling Green, Ohio, and all the experiences
You
that I had.
learn from other people, don't you?
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
wonderful.
And so I think a lot of it is, and I had and have great examples in my parents and in other people who have shared some of these things that you're mentioning. Contributing to society is important for us to do. And they've been examples in word and in deed. And I think that's, for me, what has prompted this this level of activity
Yeah.
with projects like the History Project and just in general.
That's great.
Life is for loving it, is
Well,
one of my,
I was going to say there's a lot of happiness
yes.
in what you do.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, I
Yeah.
enjoy it tremendously.
That's great.
Well, again, it's many, many thanks, John, for
Well,
this
you're
time.
most welcome. I
Yeah.
appreciate your doing it.
Yeah, well, it's I'm really happy. I'm going to turn this off.